Welcome back, venturers. It's time for another discussion about VNs. I am MR, and together with Taurus, we've nabbed a special guest on a journey to make some waves. So please light the way ahead with your radiance. Oh, dear Radiant Wave, welcome to the podcast.
Yes, I'm second time being on the channel. I'm Radiant Wave, a visual novel YouTuber that covers a whole host of different things between reviews, topic discussions, and maybe even some other far out there videos as well.
Mm-hmm. And any other medium that your videos may end up on. Yes, very cool. Thank you. Glad to have you, Radiant Wave. And so this is going to be an episode focused on the aspect of travel inside the world of visual novels. It's about a few different things, and it's partially why I'm excited to look into this topic, is that travel has so much to do with so many parts of a visual novel. The story, the characters, just the aesthetics of it as well. And so there's a few different directions to take it, right, MR?
Exactly, and we prepared 3 distinctive categories. Maybe there are more, etc., but we prepared 3. For first, we want to talk about travel as a narrative device to talk about the modes of transportation. For example, it's something that is most prominent in titles such as Maitetsu. When talking about trains and their importance and use across the world is the focal point. Okay? Less so that the protagonist and his group switches places and moves around, but rather what the mode of transportation and the vehicle means to the world. Okay? The second group I would categorize as a journey, adventure, so you have some sort of a land, country, world, and you journey across. An example of that could be titles such as Eiu Senki, that you travel all across the world, that is set up in an alternative reality universe, or maybe a vehicle. And the third category would be VN titles, that meaning a series of titles connected, in which each and every entry explores a different place in something grander than a single adventure. So in that case, the travel would signify visiting different places and exploring for whatever end or the bigger picture goal is a given situation and or place. So
run the first one by us again. What's that first topic that you wanted to address?
The first would be when we have a story centering about talking about a vehicle, meaning quite literal vehicle. In this case, Maitetsu talks about trains and their significance. And the central drama, for example, in that title is trains are outdated. Everything has stopped when it comes to trains, and a new challenger appeared in form of a personal aircraft called Aircraft, that technology in Maitetsu. Everything in that title stems down from the fact that trains as a mode of transportation hasn't been commercially viable, and the personal mode of transportation is the most popular and the most prosperous way of travel. And hence the drama. And so there's quite a lot of parallel to real world, how the new technology overshadows the old one, and those become relics of the past, maybe get sent to the museum. But at the same time, it also shows how something that was communal and used by more than just one person has been completely overshadowed by everybody possessing their own personal mode of travel.
Because, when you mentioned the personalized, what was it, like flying aircrafts, And
Yep.
they're the sort of, single use, only one or two people involved, that sort of, private aircraft sort of thing. Not like the big
Yes,
giant
exactly.
jets, which can take hundreds of people at a time.
No. It's not like everybody carrying helicopters around.
No. And I think that's a very good point, is that there's the whole communal aspect of a train, where you have the booths, where with multiple people sitting around a table or the thing, or where you're at the very least side by side with several other strangers. And I think that's one aspect of the travel that plays into the story. Now, I haven't read Maitetsu, and in fact, I'm very in the dark about it. But I mean, I imagine that's where plenty of conversations take place, right?
I could shed some light on a bit of like an example for how Maitetsu kind of utilizes travel. One instance, so as far as like the main plot point for that story beat in Maitetsu is that even the protagonist does actually have his own personal aircraft, but he ends up finding his place in the story because he is trying to prevent the aircraft company from creating a factory where they're going to produce more of those aircrafts, because they figure it's going to pollute the water and it's going to end up messing up the town. And so there is a point in Maitetsu where you can choose 3 different options about like how you're going to go about trying to stop that aircraft company. And one example MR might actually remember is that if you go with one certain character, you end up trying to become maybe like an expert when it comes to like a railroad, like conductor or engineer, and they do kind of heavily focus in on the like commercial aspect, and they end up creating a like what is called the barbecue train, where they're trying to like bring in tourism and get people to kind of experience and learn to appreciate that level of like travel and being able to kind of like sit down with other people, talk with one another, and also be able to like make memories and be able to kind of have that experience of, they're on the train seeing the sights and being able to like have fun like dining with one another as well.
Exactly. And that was a very interesting route in which you were trying to commercialize trains again, make it viable. And Taurus, you jumped directly into the communal aspect in which you talk with strangers, but I feel like the communal aspect that speaks more to travelers is actually the idea of traveling with people they know, their family, friends, and in that route specifically, that's the target demographic and the aim they had. Look, those are historical trains. Looks, we have good sights to see during the travel, as well as we're offering this and that in addition to that kind of experience. And if I remember correctly, that was I think it's also aspect of historical old trains, how they function. Again, Maitetsu went into so much details of special kinds of train fueled by electricity compared to fueled by coal. It's hard to wrap your head around all those different kinds, but I definitely enjoyed the built-in encyclopedia that explained all of that.
Yeah, and tying it back into that kind of like discussion of like which kind of like transportation vehicle would like end up polluting more so. I remember there was one portion where with the coal-powered railroad, they ended up having to like kind of figure out how do they put this sort of, I don't know, like a cover or whatever over the exhaust to make it to where it minimizes the amount of smoke that's like bellowing out of the train as they're going about their daily route.
But more so than just, the train being a mode of transportation. And I'm assuming that there's some form of the characters traveling across as well. How that part gets emphasized in the story and the themes, hopefully.
Like I mentioned, the travel between places wasn't the focus. It was still more about by using which, in this case, trains, instead of, for example, more popular aircraft. for example, and all an example of a consequence of a clash between an older relic that isn't efficient and or viable as a business venture against a new and hot technology was the fact that the drama also revolved around, should we build an aircraft factory in that small village? Because popularity of that product brings out job market as well. Whereas trains, on the other hand, it's more of a passion project that doesn't really bring revenue. And the drama continues on how to reverse such a situation and turn it around. And as Radiant correctly pointed out, one of that was increased tourism. There were sites they visited, and if I remember correctly, at one point that the end outlined, oh, look at this. This is one place A, place B, place C, place D. And you had a mapped out route of how that train looked around. Fine, so they were destinations, but I wouldn't say the traveling was that important part as much as by what you were traveling.
Mm-hmm. Do they show any parts of it though? Of, I guess to illustrate it more?
Hell yeah, although if you ask me for the names, I'd rather not butcher anything in addition to, not remembering the names of those places they visited.
Oh, but
if I remember correctly, it has like a tips guide kind of thing too, that whenever there is like some sort of like vocabulary that pops up, it gets added to that list so you can look back at it later.
True.
Oh, I love that sort of thing. The whole having some sort of physical memento to look back on those experiences, to remember that they happened and all the emotions involved. I always love that.
Yeah. I feel like the type of a story you keep alluding to throughout your questions more likely aligns with the number 2. And by the way, I'm not saying all of those groups are exclusive, but rather where's the focus? And the example I like to give for the group number 2, so where the travel is the focus, that venturing between places, between regions, between countries is the focal point of that story, has to be ethnic. It's a story about the protagonist who has a very noble goal. In a world in which you can marry only one person, he wants to marry both of his sisters, and hence he ventures of a journey on the entire continent. And during the course of the story, he uncovers some sort of a sinister plot and goes from one country to another, to place, following the footsteps of an evil organization doing some underhanded things. Okay? And that kind of wanderlust across the land, gathering your party and kind of forming a wild Scooby-Doo mystery group, solving all the crazy happenstances, that made for an entertaining story, and that kind of journey together made for an amazing bonding moments and memories.
Mm-hmm. I feel like in some ways there's that classic standard fantasy RPG plotline of you're in a fantasy land and you and your ragtag group of heroes need to journey across the realm to save the princess, take down the bad guy, and return home as heroes. Save the world and all of that jazz. And I guess you could say there's some cliche aspects to it, like going across the grassy plains or the snowy tundras or the desert levels.
Do I need to say how you start on foot? Slowly increase your capability by finding more modes of transportation, for example, a boat, and you end up flying everywhere with a plane at the end, right? Do I even need to mention that, right?
Exactly. And, like I say, it's cliche for a reason. It's that you get that sense of slowly conquering the land in a grand adventure. Because it's one thing to say to say outright that, oh, this is a big story that really, takes up a lot of the characters' lives, and it's one of the biggest adventures the world has ever seen. But it's another to make the player feel it through all of the minute-to-minute storytelling and gameplay themselves. And I think that's something that always gets conveyed well, even if you have these sort of cliche settings and the cliche environments. That sense of, physically traveling across the land and getting to expand your scope more and more really ties in to how much of a grand adventure this game or this story is supposed to feel. And like you mentioned yourself, Evenico is more complicated than that. It's got a lot more going on with it, but there's still that underlying essence of this whole world conquering quest. And I think you can really feel it by the end of it, right?
Exactly. And over the course of such a story, you, in some way, I'm going to pose
spoilers?
Bold claim. No, a bold claim. That in some way you characterize land, and if you give it enough of an atmosphere. So, for example, blindfold me, spin me around, and put music from land from Evenic, and I'll tell you immediately which that is, because each of them have their own separate vibe to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that took some care of trying to portray different lands, different happenstances there, and you and your merry Scooby-Doo gang solving mysteries. That stays with you. Both the memory of the travel as well as that place unique atmosphere.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Radiant, you have...
In a way...
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I wanted to finish that point, that in a way, a good example of that point in which the switching places, moving from A to B, leaves a lasting impression is the moment the places themselves feel like characters. And honestly, that's kind of probably the way I didn't vibe so well with my other example of this group, Eusenki. I felt like the kind of travel in that title was kind of bland, although I'll give props where they for what I had. So I give credit where credit's due. In that title specifically, I really loved treasure hunting. So traveling all across the land and finding all the mystical swords with historical value. I love that part. So, well, maybe the traveling to places didn't leave the lasting impression, but traveling with a treasure hunter, hunting for the most rarest of the swords, I'm like, yeah, I'm down for it. Please give me more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And anything like that for you, Radiant? Any sort of titles that really, I guess, spoke to you and the way that the transportation aspect tied into the big old themes?
We're going back into my Tetsu for a story that MR hasn't experienced, but I want to, like, kind of in similar to how MR was describing, where I feel like the journey and the traveling can kind of tie in with the destination and the location. I have an example of maybe taking, a decently sized like location, and then through the travel of getting on to maybe like an overnight train, you end up condensing down the overall like place that the story takes up place in. And it's kind of more of that same kind of situation of you building the connections with the people that you're actively on this journey with, but then also by the time that you get to this location after spending however many days on a train traveling to that destination, that you're able to kind of in a similar way have that like shift to where it's very memorable, and like the vibes of maybe this one town, just like it just makes it to where it's like a very memorable experience where I feel like travel, and then also in most cases when you go travel somewhere, you have a destination in mind, and how that just ties together.
Mm-hmm. Do you reference a route and or story from Last Run? with that
Yeah.
example? Okay, that's
But
why I
that's where
couldn't remember anything like that from the.
no, it is like just one singular. It's an after
Yeah,
story
fair.
for one of the characters, and the
Mhm,
entire route is just like maybe 6-7 hours of like documenting just one like almost vacation with
Oh.
like the various people of the family, and just kind of how that.
I mean, I could picture that, but I just couldn't remember anything like that, so that's why I asked. All right, I can definitely see Meitetsu taking the tourist angle of its story and saying, "Yeah, now you're the tourist, like you go protagonist." I can see that. Okay, I just didn't remember that happening, so that's why I asked. Is it from the untranslated last run? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Now, with that said, there's one title I wanted to mention, but I don't know how applicable it is to the whole aspect of travel in visual novels. And specifically, I mean, The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. Because here, the quick story is that it takes place on a train, and it's a special party for Amy's birthday, and they're doing one of those pretend murder mystery skits where, Sonic is going to get, quote unquote, murdered in a classic dinner party thing, and the detectives, the birthday girl and Tails, have to go around questioning people as part of the play and figure out who the murderer was. But unfortunately, things get a little too real, and they are legitimately having to piece together alibis and evidence and whatnot. I mentioned that this takes place on a train, but in a sense, it's about the locations, and it's not. Because when we're talking,
I can kind of see what you're talking about.
In a sense, yeah, because it's not so much about the traveling, but all of the various train cars are themed in, certain settings, and, because it's a party, and that's the whole point, is dressing up all of the train cars in unique environments. And as you go across from train car to train car, it does give you a sense of progression. It feels like you're reaching the end of this path, closing in on the truth of this murder mystery party and tightening the knot around whoever the guilty party may be. But that ties in more just to the plot. And that's something that I've kind of been struggling with several titles. It's not about the plot. It's not about the murder mystery stuff. It's got to be about the joy of traveling, of seeing the new locations. And I don't think that's quite appropriate, right?
Yes, but at the same time, I hate how it all makes sense, and you convinced me that it actually works.
No, that's the point. No.
I made a claim. I made a bold claim that the best examples of the group number 2 that focus on the travel itself is when you feel the location as characters. And those train cars, those wagons were so distinct enough that you felt it the moment you switched to the next chapter, that everything flipped, and now you are entering a saloon straight off the Western film. Everybody wears cowboy hats and say, "Hello, partner," right? Then you solve that card, you move on, and then you go into super ultra crazy heist because it's the treasure card. Like, what is even happening in this story? Like, it has that vibe. I give you that.
Yes.
The more I hear you speak, the more like, God damn it, I hate that I'm being convinced.
Yeah, but it's not in the sense that you mentioned of the locations feeling like characters. I think you mentioned that, when you said that feeling, I imagine it more of the culture of a place and how it affects the people and how it influences the plot. Feels like is its own living being. Someone to respect, just like every other character in a story.
Yep.
But what I'm talking about was something like The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, where it's simply more of plot progressions, and it's a good thing that the settings are distinct. In a sense, every setting should be distinct from each other. That for every title, that's just good writing. But I don't think they're characters like the way you describe them as. It's the traveling going. I think that's different.
Yeah, I wouldn't compare it to the same level of how I defined and talked before about Evenical, but I still feel like it's up there, at least in terms of variety. Every single card felt so much different from each other. So that's why I felt like it's close enough, but probably not to the same level.
Mm-hmm. And
But
maybe not.
I get your point when you started building that argument.
And then not the same vibes as what we're getting with here for the traveling in a visual novel, right? I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly. Not the same.
But what about this third category that you're mentioning?
Okay, so the third is probably the grandest one, in which the travel doesn't necessarily matter in terms of a title, but on a grander scope. If you take more of a meta approach across multiple entries in that series, there is something binding those places together. And as an example, I brought Rance, that over the course of his journey across the land visits all manner of different places, countries, regions. It's hard to track, and more often than not, they are, I don't want to say reference, but they are relevant and they keep mattering. It's not like a checklist of things, oh, I visited, mark a checklist on it and move on. No, everything feels like a living world that matters. And while maybe in a single title don't do as much travel, and that also varies depending on the title itself, in the course of the series you have made such a grand adventure, you can't help but look back, saying that was quite a journey from where he started to where he is now. From random nobody who just whacks everything he says with a sword, to a person mattering in a global politics across major superpowers.
Well, when you say that bit about the character changing, I feel that ties into your first group more than anything, right? The idea of looking back across a journey and seeing how far the character has come.
That also applies to that.
Yeah, because I think, one interesting part I took from your explanation was the whole idea of the world building, of just getting to see more and more of this wide world that these characters live in, and especially the way that they feel interconnected. Like you mentioned, places getting mentioned earlier, but instead of feeling like a checklist, how later, like when the story needs it to be relevant, then this place is relevant, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that whole idea of the world building, of tying a whole bunch of various aspects apart, but instead of just little tidbits of lore, it's locations, and in this case, countries, cultures, the people.
Exactly, and I divided that definition from the first group over the example in which, in the first group, that would be contained within a single title, whereas in the third group, it would be, for example, Run 01 is literally a story of trying to figure out where's the kidnapped person. You get a bounty to find a kidnapped person. That's it. It's everything happens in a single city. It is self-contained and nowhere else. Now, that city you will visit multiple times over the course of an entire series, but for the purpose of that title, you only are here. You will broaden your horizon in the second, third, fourth entry in the series, but for the purpose of that title, you are confined within that single title. And it's not until later down the line you look back and see how much more ground you've covered over the course of multiple titles within the Run series, rather than the travel mattering inside the first title, which it regrettably didn't really matter that much. You visit city itself, Colosseum and graveyard. Done. it wasn't that much of a sightseeing venture, okay? But once you broaden your horizon, go outside of the city, and maybe in some other titles you have the possibility of going back to the capital, in this case, the capital of a country. Yeah, it's like, damn, I've been here before. Let's visit some old places and maybe see what happened, what changed, how people evolved, how that city prospers or maybe has some problems right now. Damn, it builds upon world building, and now probably this explains how excited I was to bring this topic and how much it resonated with me, given that it is heavily tied with the concept of building something broader than just a story. It has to encompass slightly bit more than just story, something to tie lore, places, atmosphere, maybe. World building.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Any closing thoughts, Radio?
No, I mean, I guess I would just really agree with what MR said, and that I do think that just the concept of travel, there's so many, I guess, connecting paths between like all the various factors when it comes to just visual novels in general.
And especially getting to see it from the perspective of the main characters too. Because, as the reader, we're following their story, and we get to follow their emotions as well. Their whole, life lessons learned, and the struggles they face, and maybe even the comedy that arises as well. But, the main characters are the window to the world for us to experience too. So I think that's very interesting too, the way we can experience it.
Yeah, and the obstacles they faced, and maybe, just maybe, how they changed those places. Because that's a character development in and of itself. How it was before and how it is now.
Absolutely. Yeah, so yes, thank you everyone for listening, and a huge thank you too to Radiant Wave for stopping by for some gracious time out of your busy life.
Yes. It's been great being on here. Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure. So thanks again to all our listeners and Radiant, and venture out.
Venture out.
Venture out.